And then that way, you're covered. It is kind of confusing though to a lot of us. Thank you. Oh, it's like I didn't think it would be that much of a hot button topic. This. I bet you guys hear students that feel strongly in either direction. Let's see. Oh, that's right. Okay. I had this for you guys today because I thought this was interesting. The first baby to be put on a incubator. They were asking what the sex was and how they did it. Because we're finishing up 3 and going to chapter 4. Because we were going through our infant mortality, so the U.S. is like a third world country when it comes to infant mortality. I don't know if you guys have ever heard that. We have the worst rate of SIDS, which is sudden infant death syndrome. So, I know we covered this slide last class because I remember reading it, but 6% for white infants, 14% for black infants, and Hispanic infants was similar to whites. Primary reason for death was congenital abnormalities, and for African American infants was low birth weight. And then, we were going through the questions. What do you guys think contributes to that low birth weight or congenital stuff? And then what policy stuff can we do to like make it better?
I got a question.
Yeah.
Is this on E12?
The PowerPoint?
Yeah.
It might not be. It's the same PowerPoints we used in the class last year when you were taking it. So if you still can get into Schoology, I can try to send it out. I just forget. Let's see what it's called first off. It is Ashford PowerPoint Chapter 3. I probably can send it out easy through here. Let's do that. Because yes, your next deal is, for those of you in my intro class, we got the value paper next, but for this class, it's our eco map. That's it. So you have, when you see a client in the social work setting, and you want to get a family history, the Getagraph is really helpful. You can get like any genetics they have, any problems they have with their family, any good stuff, strengths, if we use a strengths-based approach. And then with the eco map, you can see where they're spending all their energy throughout the week. So say, for example, if you're like at the club every day, and that's coming up on your eco map, is a eco map that I can show you that's an app. It serves kind of like an eco map. It's called Life Cycle. It's an app called Life Cycle. And you do have to give it permission to track where you go, but I'm like, they're already tracking me anyway, so I like this compiles all the information of what you do. Like that's my last week, although this is my old phone. This is my last month, and then I had like 2 or 3 years in here. So you can see I had like 2,800 hours of sleep. That was 2020. I had 1,500 hours of work. That actually seems short because most people work 2,000 hours, but I guess that's because teachers don't do much in the summer. Or we went electronic and I thought I was home doing nothing when I was teaching from home. Had exercise. I drove for 608 hours. That's actually kind of crazy. But the year before that, I drove for 837 hours. That's insane because I live an hour away. So it's called Life Cycle. If you look up the app Life Cycle.
How does sleep work?
Like blue with like that little circle on it. So if you search Life Cycle app, I don't know if it's only for this type of phone, but I just put it on my new phone because I'm like, I want to track myself again. Since the government's already tracking you, so you might as well get that information and use it to your advantage. All right, let's see what it did. So if you download it, it always takes like, yeah, because I downloaded it 2 days ago. It takes 38 hours to get your first reading. What is your main occupation? Work, school, or working from home? Let's say work.
You said it's called life cycle.
Yeah. Yeah, you just give it permission to track you, and then you can label every one of those spaces. That's funny. It says yesterday I was at home for 15 hours and 17 minutes, and I slept for 6 hours and 32 minutes. My wife would be jealous of me because the babies are both sick. Then I was home for 10 hours the other day. Let's see here. Are you guys able to find it?
You said it, in the regular email?
For the life cycle? To download the app, it's called Life. Help you make your ego map. Like it'll give you the breakdown of like how many hours you work out, how many, like I said, like as this one has the details of like exercise, walk the dog, ice cream shop, coffee store, pizza place, church. They got the yin and the yang for church. So it kind of like shows you your daily or weekly activities. So the point being to show you like what consumes your day, and that's if you want to be aware of it, it's when we're not doing our best, sometimes we want to ignore it and not pay attention to like what consumes most of our time. Like if we're I'm thinking my freshman and sophomore year of college, I probably wouldn't want the life cycle app because it would have freaked me out. Because I wasn't going to class and I had a 0.59 GPA. So
on the app, for example, it says working out. Would you click that in? Like how does it know?
sometimes, yes. So they go off your location. They'll ask you, sometimes they have that info, like it'll say you were at Gold's Gym or on Central State. Now we just got added to Google Maps. They might have workout facility, or they can tell you were just walking based off of how many steps you took. So it'll say like you ran for an hour, you walked for half an hour. So it depends on the workout. But oftentimes it's probably asking me right here. Like I would click on it and somehow it knows that's my house. Somehow it knows, she's FaceTiming about the kids. Interesting. Let me, I don't know if it would let me do, I'll just ask if they're okay real fast, if you guys can excuse me. Hey, we're in class. I wanted to see if everything's okay.
Uh-oh.
She's standing. Is she okay? Does she have COVID?
Yeah, she has proof.
Okay.
But yes, you're really set up to get.
Okay. Send it to me. I can get on the way home.
I think my mom.
Okay. Well, I'll call you right when we're done.
Sounds good.
Okay. Love you. Bye. Well, at least they don't have COVID, I guess. I guess it can be bad for babies. What was I going to email to you? You asked for the PowerPoint? Okay, let's do that. So new announcement. Let's say Life Cycle was the app, right? Life Cycle app and PowerPoint. This is how you remember to do things when you get old and you forget to do things. For EcoMap, it may help to use the Life Cycle app. My God, she's calling from Nicaragua now. Life Cycle app. Any of you guys been out of the country before? Where to?
China, Ireland.
Oh, wow.
Afghanistan.
Before COVID, I guess.
Yeah.
How was Afghanistan?
Just when I thought
was scary.
I've been to Pakistan. It was scary. Like India and Pakistan, we took the.
It's just scary.
Well, I mean, I was on deployment, so yeah.
So you just flew through?
No, I was in Afghanistan for a month. My deployment was mainly in Kuwait, but we had to go out there for a mission.
So for the like Air Force,
Army.
Army. Wow. Okay. Yeah, my friend served in Afghanistan for like 2 years.
Like, I'm just glad we were just there for a month. We were supporting EOD. So it was kind of fun because we have a blow up and stuff. But
Yeah.
like at the same time, I was like.
So you've seen. Well, and then Russia was there in 1989 and 1990. So there's been a lot of wars in Afghanistan for like ever. And apparently, I don't know if this is well known, and I want to back up my research, but there is in 89 and 90, there was, I should say, after 89, 90, there was a request to run a pipeline through Afghanistan. And apparently the Taliban did give a price, but it wasn't the price that, say, ExxonMobil and those guys liked. And I've heard that that's partly, nobody would want to say that, but that was maybe partly why we invaded. We would hope not, And then I hear they're sitting on $1 trillion of precious metals that like work for your phones.
See, and it's like when we were learning like everything about when Kuwait and Afghanistan went over there, I was like, why? Like, what was the point of us even getting involved?
Right.
It really just kind of seemed like a strictly just.
And it would have been when you were young, right?
Yeah, like what was it?
I was 20. I was 22.
I was like, when Saddam invaded Kuwait, it was late '90s, and I was probably like 2.
Right. Yeah. Hello.
Hey.
How are you?
Good, how are you?
Good. So, yeah, the first Gulf War was 1991, and that wasn't Afghanistan, but like, so yes, that is bringing it back to what we're learning about childbirth here. It's I've heard that most of the nation of Afghanistan is under the age of 20. Like a lot of them
You
are
see a lot of kids and a lot of teenagers and kids.
right.
People that are just like, in that area. I'm sorry.
Everybody upside down.
Well, there's been wars the whole time. So either they got asylum and left, they were killed in a civil war or a war with Russia or a war with the United States or something else. It's kind of a mess, yeah. It's and that's some of our policy. This should come to you guys now for the life cycle app. But yeah, it's kind of you're like sometimes you feel confused by what we're doing. You're like, what the heck do we do that for? So, and when you do kind of break it down though to understand the importance of cheap electricity and gas for transportation and even precious metals for cell phone communications, it makes you wonder if there's something else going on sometimes. Like, wait, was it all about terrorism or was there an addendum to that we don't know about? So this probably was not a picture of the first ventilator baby because I don't think they had photographs back then. But I saw this when we were talking about birth and being able to live outside the womb. The incubator is a big reason now why babies at like half gestation or 23 weeks can live outside the womb. There's these little incubators that they say basically provide oxygen and protection from cold and infections and then simulate ideal conditions for a neonatal baby, especially if they're premature. So her name in 1888 was Edith Eleanor McLean. I wonder what city that was in, probably in New York somewhere. Yep, Coney Island, New York. So let's see. So this is what kind of helped us to have babies outside of the womb, was that ventilator. And finishing up on these PowerPoints. Let me make sure I got you. We're ending chapter 3 and starting chapter 4, but here's chapter 3 if I can finish. So the questions we were talking about last class, it was what contributes to the infant mortality and what can be helpful. A big one is poverty. So if you're not getting like proper nutrition when you're pregnant, or if you live in a war-torn country, or like there's lots of stressors, poverty, if there's also lack of transport to a doctor, or the ability to see the doctor. Prenatal vitamins are the biggest. I don't know if you guys have ever heard that. So like women should take prenatals even before they get pregnant, which is kind of weird because it's like, how do you anticipate? I guess you can. We didn't. We got married in December, but we got pregnant in like September. So we were expecting to get pregnant on our wedding day. But sometimes you get pregnant earlier, it just is part of doing the deal. So my wife took the prenatals and breastfed the first baby. It was a little bit harder than the second baby. She's gotten better. So it's funny. They're 3 months now and 14 months. And the 3-month-old weighs 15 pounds and the 21-month-old only weighs 21 pounds. So they're like 6 pounds apart because the breastfed baby, I guess, gets more fat and nutrients and like the diet that mom gets. Formula can give you, formula can be fine, but it's a different development. So going back to the risk factor of poverty, if after the baby's born, all that you're feeding them is formula, that's fine. They can survive off that. But sometimes you'll see on either milk or a soy milk carton that says, do not use this as formula because like it'll kill the baby. Like it doesn't have the nutrients you need, which is like all those vitamins, all the minerals and stuff that formula is made in a way that it mimics the breast milk. One other social strength or one other hazard is 1 in 4 women are physically abused during pregnancy. So usually that steps up, like maybe they're already fighting ahead of time, and then the woman finds out she's pregnant, and then that sets off. There's just like significant stressors, or like we can't afford it. So making sure to get them to the care they need, whatever that may be. Like we have domestic violence shelters in Cincinnati. Usually, actually, there's one here 3 miles away. So downtown Xenia, most big cities have domestic violence shelters to make sure people are safe that want to be safe. And then, this is the miscarriage, and you just got your announcement. I suspect. Did it do you guys?
Let's see, I got it.
All right. So we were saying before you came in, you can download this little life cycle app, and it'll help with making your ego map, which is basically just saying where you've been all throughout the week. And it'll tell me like my month. So right now that one only has August, and then I started doing this when I started teaching this class in 2018. So I wanted to see how much sleep I got, how much I worked, how much I drove, which is probably bad for your health, but I drive somewhere between 700 and 800 hours a year, it looks like. That's a lot. Is that 10 hours a week, I guess? Yeah, it's like 12 hours of driving every week. Like I put 4,000 miles on my car in the past 17,000 miles in 3 months. So it's like 4,000 miles a month, which is a lot. It'll burn you through a car. So when you guys are making these, you'll basically like kind of identify, how much of your week is school, how much could be work, your social life, which is fine, maybe friends and family, maybe, and there's several ways to do it. A lot of people like the pie charts because it breaks it up. If you go to church, if you exercise, it looks like, it says walked for 457 hours. So I almost walked as much as actually in 2020, I ran for 636 hours. So I ran more than I drove. But this year I had a knee injury. I'm curious. It won't tell me until New Year's Day, but I haven't run at all this year. So hopefully my walking has stepped up. So it kind of keeps track. Like, what do you spend your entire week on? How do you make sure you do your self-care? You make sure to get your homework done. Make sure to have a social life. Make sure to have fun. Make sure to work enough to pay for things. But it's just like a eco map of like good relationships and how you experience life. So any questions on the eco map? Does some of that make sense? It's kind of simplified, but the idea is when you work with your social work clients, you want to have like a genetic history so you can help them with that. And that's why we make the genogram. And you want to have an energy history. So like, what do you do with your energy throughout the week? And if you notice that they're in over the Rhine smoking crack 15 hours a week, you're like, that might be a problem. Or if you're like at the bar 15 hours a week, that might be a problem. You know what I mean? So like, and they may not tell you, especially with addictions, but if they're looking for jobs and you notice they're not leaving the house at all, it's like, it's a way to like bring about discussion. So like, what do you do? Like, are you able to apply to stuff online? Can you look for work online? And it eases the discussion a little bit when you're working with people. Here's your last one. Okay, prenatal information to obtain during an assessment. So as a social worker, we want to ask about like gestation, the birth, how it all happened. Was it like traumatic? Did they have a C-section? And then ask about the newborn, like the weight, and if doctors had any diagnosis, how can we help you as a social worker? And as fast as that, you're in infancy. Like, I remember we got married December of 2019. We had a baby June 14th of 2020, and then we had another baby on May 10th of 2021. So it was like fast. I am 43 years old, so we wanted it that way. Like, she's 35. We were like, yeah, let's go ahead and move fast. But it has been stressful. Like, there's no doubt about it. It's like a lot of work. It's a lot of a lot of hard work. And infancy is kind of crazy. So some social change and consequences for infants. So the high infant mortality history, like the main developmental task in infancy was survival, especially until we got antibiotics. That's like probably number one. That do you guys know how many people were on planet Earth 100 years ago? That's always like my favorite question. Like, if you were to take a guess, do you know how many there are now today? If you guess the population.
88 million.
That's a big number. You're right. So I always do it this way, like for my genogram. So let's do like generic numbers. I want to do it in a place where you guys can all see it, even though the camera can't. I wonder if the camera can see over here. Yeah, let's not. All right. So my dad was born. I think my sister was born. I was born. My other sister was born. 1999. Like, if you Googled it, does it say 7 or 8?
Say 7.
7.674
million.
Damn. Okay. So my dad was born in 1945. There was 2 billion people. That's actually the year we got a lot of antibiotics and stuff to treat babies so they don't die of syphilis or all the stuff that we were talking about last week. My sister was born in 1971. So in like 25 years, I guess that's 25, we almost doubled our population. Well, I think my dad was 33 when he had me. So I was born in 1978. We doubled our population there in 33 years. Then I had a little sister born in 86. We had about 5 billion people right here in 1986. This is just like an easier way for me to remember, like a generic way. I think by 1999, I remember studying psychology, and they said, we are going to have 6 billion people, or like the text was like, the 6 billionth person was born on December 31st, 1999, something crazy. And then I can't remember when we hit 7 billion, but it sounds like we're at almost 8 billion people. Good and bad, because one, people would say it's overpopulation. So if we all lived a first world lifestyle like we do in America and consumed at the rate we did with gas, electric, and oil, it probably would be overpopulation. But most of the world, if you've seen Afghanistan or if you see Russia, the amount of energy used is different, I feel like, than we use in America. I feel like we use a lot of energy, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Not to make fun of us, but I guess you're allowed to make fun of yourself. We use a lot of shit, basically. We use way too much. But, it is what it is. We're used to it. It's not a judgment. Like, we were born that way and we were used to it. Like, I was used to growing up with cartoons on Saturday morning. Maybe they have those in Russia too, but you watch the television and cartoons.
We
What?
are like a little bit moving too faster than us. Like we had the same thing, but 20 years after.
Right, yeah. And when I visited India, all of them had cell phones too. So like the technology is catching up. I would say the biggest cheap oil to drive a car or fly a plane. I guess planes use the most oil. And again, they might have electric. They have electric cars, but they might even have electric planes soon, or we can produce it from electricity. So those are some of the things that have changed. But again, getting back to the point, historically, infant mortality, like people died. The majority of people are dying here. Like that's why we were asking, why did you have so many kids? Well, most of them died. So why'd you have 6, 8, or 10 kids to work on your farm? Because they all died. Then you get antibiotics and they're like starting to live. And then, so infant mortality isn't as big, but the rates decreased dramatically with improved nutrition. So that's the other half. So antibiotics and nutrition, that helped us a ton. And control of infections and diseases. Increased recognition in the early 60s of the consequences of poor early child development. So that's when I'm going to get into what they call ACEs. It's the adverse childhood experiences that we all could experience. We started policy, is that last question was what policies can help. We started a lot of policies in the 50s and 60s. So in 65, we got Head Start program. And that's a lot of our social work jobs. So like if you get a social work job, have any of you ever heard something called Help Me Grow? That's one of them that like a lot of social workers get into. If you're born premature, they'll do home visits and teach you how to like get the right nutrition for your baby, how to like use their brain and like get them walking and get them thinking. Then we had Early Head Start was Bill Clinton administration in 1995. So we've had legislation pieces passed so that and a lot of us experienced those growing up. I was graduating high school. That was my senior year in 1995, but like a lot of us experienced that stuff growing up. Some of the societal changes, both parents are working now. That's another thing we had mentioned. Like in the 80s, you might only have one parent working. In the 90s, you need 1.5 jobs to pay for everybody. In the 2000s, you need like 2 jobs. So sometimes both parents or dad or mom had 2 jobs. Lately, it's like you need 3 or 4 jobs to pay for everything. It's crazy. Inflation, and I harp on this, you'll get sick of me talking about it, but inflation is bad. And you got to find ways to protect yourself about it. Like if you want to buy a new car or you want to buy a new, I don't know, anything getting expensive that you guys are looking at buying in the future. Like I had to get a new computer last year and I had to put it on a damn payment plan. This thing was like $600. I was like, that's pretty good for a Mac. You can probably get like a Dell, which for half that, but Macs last years and years and years. So I went ahead and did 0% interest for 12 months, and I guess that's $50 a month to pay for this stupid thing to film class. So other policies, there's all these acts that were passed. Before I get into those, we had the first baby born, and then, so ACEs. Have any of you ever heard of the ACEs before? Only if you had me in class before. If you were paying attention, they had me in class before. That's the catch. So here's a quick intro. Adverse childhood experiences. This is, again, as social workers, well, the next video is how can we prevent ACEs, but here's what they are first off.
Know that exposure to ACEs is widespread. It's true that putting a stop to ACEs is no small task, but it's a goal that we all must work toward. The strategies outlined in Essentials for Childhood can guide your unique efforts to reduce risk factors and promote protective factors that exist across our social ecology. If each of us takes action and we encourage others to get involved, we can create a society which understands that early adversities hurt individuals, families, and entire communities. Let's all take responsibility for creating the safe, stable, nurturing relationships and environments that all children deserve. Through our collective commitment, we will help children grow up to be healthy and productive adults, so that they, in turn, can build stronger and safer families and communities for their children. As this work unfolds, I will continue to monitor data about ACEs, and I'll be here to report on our successes and achievements as we see positive changes.
So this one's a better descriptive video.
Hi, this is my neighborhood. I grew up in this building. This is a great community now, but it's had its share of problems. When I was a kid, our community had high unemployment, a lack of resources for families, and lots of kids hanging out with no adult supervision. You might have heard about adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs. ACEs are traumatic events in childhood, like abuse and neglect, that can increase risk for future problems. But they don't have to. The good news is that ACEs and their consequences can be prevented. Take me, for example. I was at risk for ACEs, and despite all the things that put me at risk, some pretty incredible people helped make sure that I wouldn't become another statistic. Come on, I'll show you around. That's Jackson. He's a cool kid. His dad left when he was 2, and his mom works 2 jobs. I hang out with him every Thursday night and help him with his homework. Sometimes we grab ice cream. It's fun. Plus, he has another adult role model to learn from and trust. That's Mr. Martino. When I was a kid, he let me help him at the store sometimes after school when my parents were working late. He did that for a bunch of us. My dad actually found his job as a mechanic because of Mr. Martino. This helped our family in so many ways. Not only did my dad have a steady paycheck, which eased his stress about paying rent and buying necessities like food and clothes, but he was also a lot nicer to me, my brother, and my mom once he started working a job that made him feel good about himself. When communities come together, they can do so much to prevent ACEs. Mr. Martino and other local business owners put together a series of career workshops to help people like my dad find work. My mom also got a job with a company that allowed her to work from home and spend more time with me and my brother. Mariana has just gotten out of a class about handling challenges of single parenting. The clinic offers free childcare so Mariana's daughter, Ella, can play while Mariana's in class. The class helps parents like Mariana develop positive parenting skills, not just for babies and toddlers, but for teenagers too. This is another way our community has come together to give families the resources they need. And just one more way to prevent ACEs. This was my school, Riverside Middle, right in the heart of town. These kids are here for a sponsored summer camp. This community-supported program helps families with affordable, quality childcare and helps kids get tutoring and learn life skills. When I was a kid, I spent a lot of time at this school all year long. There was one counselor, Miss Greer, who I remember more than anyone. She was a really good listener. Miss Greer helped me and my brother get involved in after-school activities like baseball and soccer. Our coaches were super nice and were mentors to us. Staying after school for practice kept us and a lot of other kids out of trouble. When schools help take responsibility for preventing ACEs, everybody wins. My life could have gone in a completely different direction. Studies show that ACEs can have long-term negative effects on kids' health and well-being that may last into adulthood and even continue in future generations. But by people.
So this chart might only make sense with context given. So most of us have like 1, 2, or 3 ACEs. It's an adverse childhood experience. There's an online quiz you can take for free. They're just starting to correlate more with the ACEs. If you had 4, 5, 6, anything more than 4, they're saying more likely to have chronic disease, depression, not finishing school, and job challenges.
In groups taking action, ACEs can be prevented. In fact, there are 5 known strategies that help stop ACEs before they even start. you can implement them in your own community, just like we did. How? By strengthening economic support for families, by changing social norms to support parents in positive parenting, by providing quality care and education early in life, by enhancing parenting skills to promote healthy child development, and by intervening to lessen harms and prevent future risk. So, now you know my story, and you've seen the prevention strategies in my community that helped me beat the odds. I had healthy relationships with my family and friends. I learned how to take care of myself and make good choices. And today, I'm a mentor to other kids who need some extra help so they don't become an ACEs statistic. Safe, stable, and nurtured relationships and environments are essential to prevent child abuse and neglect and to assure that all kids reach their full potential. Are you thinking what I'm thinking? Banana split? You got it.
So this could be one of the major mental health challenges that you give for your presentation or your final paper if you wanted, like child poverty, adverse childhood experiences, domestic violence, and then of course there's addiction and alcoholism if you want to present on that, bipolar or depression. So just some ideas here. Have any of you guys heard of ACEs before? Like, you probably knew about them, but hearing what they are here is different. How many of you had me for class before? I should ask that. So, do you remember the Dr. Nadine Brooks video? It's okay if you don't. I don't get mad if you forget stuff from my class. ACEs? Videos. If you remember it, I won't waste your time on it. The typical one is her TED Talk. Although I would like to see this one. How do you open a window in a separate window? Do you press like Control or Alt? Control? I think it's Control. All right, because I want to do TED Talk. So this is what I usually show, is I feel that this is what a lot of us are facing when we do social work with folks that have ACEs. Do you guys remember this video if you had me in class before? She looks familiar, so she'll stand out. Let's see. She is a medical doctor. And as mentioned, this does start very young, but could also start in the womb too. So that's why I want to begin this early in the chapter right now. You guys ever watch TED Talks before? They're usually short, like 15 minutes, but this is the research that backs the ACEs, and it's worth a share. I'd actually like this.
In the mid-90s, the CDC and Kaiser Permanente discovered an exposure that dramatically increased the risk for 7 out of 10 of the leading causes of death in the United States. In high doses, it affects brain development, the immune system, hormonal systems, and even the way our DNA is read and transcribed. Folks who are exposed in very high doses have triple the lifetime risk of heart disease and lung cancer, and a 20-year difference in life expectancy.
So you live 20 years less if you have a lot of adverse childhood experiences, which sounds crazy. So she kind of breaks it down here. That's where I want to
Yet
kind of
doctors
focus in.
today are not trained in routine screening or treatment. Now, the exposure I'm talking about is not a pesticide or packaging chemical. It's childhood trauma. Okay, what kind of trauma am I talking about here? I'm not talking about failing a test or losing a basketball game. I am talking about threats that are so severe or pervasive that they literally get under our skin and change our physiology. Things like abuse or neglect, or growing up with a parent who struggles with mental illness or substance dependence. Now, for a long time, I viewed these things in the way I was trained to view them, either as a social problem, refer to social services, or as a mental health problem, refer to mental health services. And then something happened to make me rethink my entire approach. When I finished my residency, I wanted to go someplace where I felt really needed, someplace where I could make a difference. So I came to work for California Pacific Medical Center, one of the best private hospitals in Northern California. And together, we opened a clinic in Bayview, Hunters Point, one of the poorest, most underserved neighborhoods in San Francisco. Now, prior to that point, there had been only one pediatrician in all of Bayview to serve more than 10,000 children. So we hung a shingle and we were able to provide top quality care regardless of ability to pay. It was so cool. We targeted the typical health disparities, access to care, immunization rates, asthma hospitalization rates, and we hit all of our numbers. We felt very proud of ourselves. But then I started noticing a disturbing trend. A lot of kids were being referred to me for ADHD, or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. But when I actually...
I also want to stop it here is at Lighthouse for a long time, we diagnosed ADHD all the time and everybody. And you guys might even remember it from like 2001 until 2012 or even further in. If they showed symptomology of ADHD, we diagnosed it. What they changed in the DSM-5 is PTSD can be given to a child, especially if they had adverse childhood experiences, and there's similar symptomology, ADHD and PTSD, inability to focus, hard to concentrate on tasks. So that's what she's saying. Everyone was diagnosed ADHD, but she noticed a trend, and she found this study where they, again, detailed adverse childhood experiences that may have led to the inability to concentrate.
We did a thorough history of physical. What I found was that for most of my patients, I couldn't make a diagnosis of ADHD. Most of the kids I was seeing had experienced such severe trauma that it felt like something else was going on. Somehow, I was missing something important. Now, before I did my residency, I did a master's degree in public health. And one of the things that they teach you in public health school is that if you're a doctor and you see 100 kids that all drink from the same well, and 98 of them develop diarrhea, you can go ahead and write that prescription for dose after dose after dose of antibiotics, or you can walk over and say, what the hell is in this well? So I began reading everything that I could get my hands on about how exposure to adversity affects the developing brains and bodies of children. And then one day, my colleague walked into my office and he said, Dr. Burke, have you seen this? In his hand was a copy of a research study called the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study. That day changed my clinical practice and ultimately my career. The Adverse Childhood Experiences Study is something that everybody needs to know about. It was done by Dr. Vince Felitti at Kaiser and Dr. Bob Onda at the CDC, and together they asked 17,500 adults about their history of exposure to what they called adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs. Those include physical, emotional, or sexual abuse, physical or emotional neglect, parental mental illness, substance dependence, incarceration, parental separation or divorce, or domestic violence. For every yes, you would get a point on your ACE score. And then what they did was they correlated these ACE scores against health outcomes. What they found was striking. Two things. Number one, ACEs are incredibly common. 67% of the population had at least one ACE, and 12.6%, 1 in 8, had 4 or more ACEs. The second thing that I found was that there was a dose-response relationship between ACEs and health outcomes. The higher your ACE score, the worse your health outcomes. For a person with an ACE score of 4 or more, their relative risk of chronic obstructive pulmonary disease was 2.5 times that of someone with an ACE score of 0. For hepatitis, it was also 2.5 times. For depression, it was 4.5 times. For suicidality, it was 12 times. A person with an ACE score of 7 or more had triple the lifetime risk of lung cancer and 3.5 times the risk of ischemic heart disease, the #1 killer in the United States of America. Well, of course, this makes sense. You know, some people looked at this data and they said, come on, you know, you have a rough childhood, you're more likely to drink and smoke and do all these things that are going to ruin your health. This isn't science. This is just bad behavior. It turns out this is exactly where the science comes in. We now understand better than we ever have before how exposure to early adversity affects the developing brains and bodies of children. It affects areas like the nucleus accumbens, the pleasure and reward center of the brain that is implicated in substance dependence. It inhibits the prefrontal cortex, which is necessary for impulse control and executive function, a critical area for learning. And on MRI scans, we see measurable differences in the amygdala, the brain's fear response center. So there are real neurologic reasons why folks exposed to high doses of adversity are more likely to engage in high-risk behavior. And that's important to know. But it turns out that even if you don't engage in any high-risk behavior, you're still more likely to develop heart disease or cancer. The reason for this has to do with the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, the brain's and body's stress response system that governs our fight or flight response. How does it work? Well, imagine you're walking in the forest and you see a bear. Immediately, your hypothalamus sends a signal to your pituitary, which sends a signal to your adrenal gland that says, release stress hormones, adrenaline, cortisol. And so your heart starts to pound, your pupils dilate, your airways open up, and you are ready to either fight that bear or run from the bear. And that is wonderful if you're in a forest and there's a bear. But the problem is what happens when the bear comes home every night. And this system is activated over and over and over again. And it goes from being adaptive or life-saving to maladaptive or health-damaging. Children are especially sensitive to this repeated stress activation because their brains and bodies are just developing. High doses of adversity not only affect brain structure and function, they affect the developing immune system, developing hormonal systems, and even the way our DNA is read and transcribed. So for me, this information threw my old training out the window, because when we understand the mechanism of a disease, when we know not only which pathways are disrupted, but how, then as doctors, it is our job to use this science for prevention and treatment. That's what we do. So in San Francisco, we created the Center for Youth Wellness to prevent, screen, and heal the impacts of ACEs and toxic stress. We started simply with routine screening of every one of our kids at their regular physical, because I know that if my patient has an ACE score of 4, she's 2.5 times as likely to develop hepatitis or COPD. She's 4.5 times as likely to become depressed, and she's 12 times as likely to attempt to take her own life as my patient with 0 ACEs. I know that when she's in my exam room. For our patients who do screen positive, we have a multidisciplinary treatment team that works to reduce the dose of adversity and treat symptoms using best practices, including home visits, care coordination, mental health care, nutrition, holistic interventions, and yes, medication when necessary. But we also educate parents about the impact of ACEs and toxic stress the same way you would for covering electrical outlets or lead poisoning. And we tailor the care of our asthmatics and our diabetics in a way that recognizes that they may need more aggressive treatment given the changes to their hormonal and immune systems. So the other thing that happens when you understand this science is that you want to shout it from the rooftops, because this isn't just an issue for kids in Bayview. I figured the minute that everybody else heard about this, it would be routine screening, your multidisciplinary treatment teams, and it would be a race to the most effective clinical treatment protocols. Yeah, that did not happen. And that was a huge learning for me. What I had thought of as simply best clinical practice, I now understand to be a movement. In the words of Dr. Robert Block, the former president of the American Academy of Pediatrics, adverse childhood experiences are the single greatest unaddressed public health threat facing our nation today. And for a lot of people, that's a terrifying prospect. The scope and scale of the problem seems so large that it feels overwhelming to think about how we might approach it. But for me, that's actually where the hope lies. Because when we have the right framework, when we recognize this to be a public health crisis, then we can begin to use the right toolkit to come up with solutions. From tobacco to lead poisoning to HIV/AIDS, the United States actually has quite a strong track record with addressing public health problems. But replicating those...
Shoot. I'm only stopping it because it says on my YouTube channel, your stream has been temporarily blocked because we detected copyright. I guess the TED Talks. I know she uses a lot of big words. How do you guys, is it making sense?
Yes.
And I love this video. I wish it wasn't like a TED Talk, because and she may have one where it's, we can finish. You can watch the rest. I'll try to send it out. But she also does this on the PBS hour. So this is instead of the last 3 minutes there. I guess I'll be blocked regardless. But
An American experience. The minute she took that up, she was a figure of fascination.
She hated being called the slave justice, but that's exactly what she was.
This gave her immense power.
If you could win O'Connor, then you could win 5-4.
Sandra Day O'Connor, the first on American Experience.
You've heard them all. Wear your seatbelt. Don't smoke. Don't drink and drive. These are all pieces of advice that we're accustomed to.
all right, good news. The stream is no longer blocked due to copyright issues. We'll see what they say about PBS.
Hearing, but they become second nature only because of effective public health campaigns. It takes time and persuasion to change behavior. Tonight, pediatrician Nadine Burke Harris shares her humble opinion on what she sees as a grave threat to many children, what she believes has been misdiagnosed and overlooked.
10 years ago, at my pediatric clinic in San Francisco, teachers, social workers, and parents were bringing me child after child with concerns of ADHD. As I examined my patients, I noticed that the highest rate of behavioral problems was occurring in the kids whose parents had drug addictions or mental illness, or those who were subject to violence at home. When I dug into the science, what I found was that for most of these kids, the problem wasn't run-of-the-mill ADHD. For most of my kids, the real problem was what the American Academy of Pediatrics now recognizes as toxic stress. Ultimately, it all boils down to our fight or flight response, what happens in our bodies when we experience something scary. But when activated too often, like with repeated abuse or neglect or parental addiction, it can change the structure and function of children's developing brains. It can affect their hormones, the immune system, even the way DNA is read and transcribed. And it dramatically increases the risk of both behavioral and health problems in childhood and adulthood. Toxic stress affects white kids, Black and brown kids, rich, poor, urban, rural. In other words, it can affect anyone and it can happen anywhere. But right now, only 4% of pediatricians in the US are screening for toxic stress. Most haven't received any training on how to identify kids who are at risk. This has to change. Too many children with behavioral symptoms of toxic stress are being labeled with ADHD and given stimulants without any identification of the root cause.
So the stimulants is either Ritalin or Adderall. That's usually what we would prescribe and what even I was prescribed as a teenager. So,
and many kids show no behavioral symptoms at all, yet they are still more than twice as likely to go on to develop asthma, autoimmune disease, heart disease, and cancer. And their life expectancy can be cut short by decades. More than 34 million American children have had at least one adverse childhood experience, like witnessing violence at home or being sexually molested. We need every medical professional in this country to be equipped with the right tools for universal screening. When identified early, doctors, educators, and caregivers can help reverse the biological effects of childhood trauma. Together, we can give every child a shot at a healthy life.
Important advice from Nadine Burke-Harris.
so that one summed it up a little better, and they didn't cut me out for that. So, as mentioned, for up until the DSM-5, so you guys will learn about the DSM-4 and 5, the Diagnostic and Statistic Manual, and that was what we used and we still use for diagnosis. So when we practice as a social worker, we diagnose folks with PTSD or ADHD or substance use disorder, and that's the book that's like that thick. I can email you a copy of it if you want it because I found a free download. And up until the DSM-5, they didn't have PTSD diagnosis for kids. They really only had it for adults that had survived the war, Vietnam War, or had PTSD from a war. That changed with the DSM-5. They saw kids showing symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, and they call it more specifically toxic stress. So Dr. Nadine is one of the experts, and there's amazing TED Talks, as you saw. I just wanted to stop because I didn't want to have the whole YouTube video thrown out for people that have COVID and have to watch it online. But this is some of the stuff that, could even be, we mentioned like both parents working, with less supervision, it's easier to go out and drink or use drugs and things of that nature, or they're stressed out because they're both working because they don't have enough money and provide adequately, or you can't buy the proper nutrition, or you live in a food desert. So there's several things. Do all of you know what food deserts are in here? Do they have food deserts in Russia? It's basically where you have to walk more than 1.5 miles to get to a fresh vegetables grocery store. So, because you could drive, so that's one solution, but if you're in poverty and you don't have a car, it's hard to go get fresh fruits and vegetables. Like here, I don't know where the heck we go buy fresh fruits and vegetables. Like the gas station might have something, the cafeteria might, but it's technically a food desert right here. Like I grew up in a food desert, so it's easier to buy like chips and Fritos that like last on the shelf forever. Whereas a vegetable has to be refrigerated and only lasts for like a week or two, depending on how you store it. So there's a lot of research on that, what the nutrition pieces, and then infant stage of human development. Let's see here. my wife saying, when do you get to leave? So I hope it's not a bad diagnosis for the kids. Any questions about this? Does some of it make sense, or is it like,
It's pretty clear.
yeah. Which is interesting that it was like mind-blowing research for, like, especially in, I think it came out in 1997. Your masks ever fall apart and like you get a piece in your mouth? Or they just smell like saliva in general. So maybe we'll stop there, which is a slide like from birth to 2. There's tons of physical growth because actually my daughter was born at 6.5 pounds. She went to 13, I think, by like 13 weeks. So you like double your size in a few months. She's 21 now, but actually, yeah, my son was born at 7.5 pounds, and he is May 10th, so he's like 15 weeks. He's already 15 or 16 pounds. So like, imagine if we kept growing at that rate. That means next year I would weigh like 400 pounds, you know. But you don't keep growing at that rate. Like you slow down and get older and stuff like that. But physical growth, motor development, like she started walking literally on her first birthday, which was crazy, and we'll go through those. Vocal development, sometimes we'll do like nonsense, like and you get like annoyed with it, but that's how they're like practicing talking. Cognitive and social development, and we'll go through some of those next time. But I might stop there in case she needs me to pick up their like I guess they give you a steroid to help your lungs, or maybe it's here to like open up better and breathe. I don't know. So, any questions about anything?
Will we have any tests on this course?
I give practice exams for people that like give you questions, answers, and explanations so that like when you take the licensure exam, you'll know and be expected what to do. But no, usually I've replaced that with a presentation and then a big final paper.
Right.
So I know it takes the pressure off, and I guess you could technically blow it off. But if you're taking the US exam or even the Russian licensure exam, if they have one, you might want to know this stuff. You know what I mean? So
It's like in the driving sense when you already know all the questions and you like have a set of the organized questions.
right, because you can take in US our senior year, your last semester, you can take the social work license exam, which is crazy. So like, are some of you juniors or only sophomores? So you could take it technically your January of your senior year. If you're on time. So like in a year and a couple months you could take it. So
Do
yeah.
you have a license to work?
Do I have that?
You will have a license to work after this exam.
Oh, you get a license in social work, yes.
Yeah,
So it's
you
called
will be able to work for a year and then you will have to take another exam.
Oh, well, yes. So if you get it's called your BSW. It's a bachelor's of social work. With this, you could get an LSW. Or if you're like me and you got like a stupid Bachelor of Science or Bachelor of Arts, I got both. I went on to get an MSW, that's next. And that allows you this is the next test you're talking about. It allows you to get an independent license in social work, so an LISW. And that's where you get paid the big bucks, so to speak. It's really not that much money, but it's good and it's enough to live on. And then you can also get LISWS with a supervision insignia. No test for that, but there is a LSW test and an LISW test. And usually to get this, you have to work 2 years in the field after your MSW and be supervised by like a LISWS.
Thanks.
Yeah. So any other questions? I guess, dang, I'm like pushing it, I guess. So hopefully they don't cut off too much. If you guys know anybody else that's doing the electronic part of the class, you can tell them, watch for Dr. Nadine Brooks. She's really good. And I'll see